So let's talk about life skills and really the best way to teach the individuals we work with more independence with life skills. And one of the biggest tools that we use is called a task analysis. And all that really means is we take a big task and we break it down into smaller steps. And then what?
Well, let's look at an example, Shira. So let's look at hand washing. I mean, that's pretty relevant today. I could say, okay, does the student know how to wash his or her hands? Well, what does that mean? I mean, there's so many steps involved in washing your hands. So instead of just saying, does your kiddo know how to do hand washing? You can break it down. So step number 1, I'm going to turn on the tap. Step number 2, I'm going to put my hands underneath of the tap. Step number 3, I'm going to pump the soap for X amount of time, 1 pump, 2 pumps, etc. I'm going to scrub for how many seconds, blah, blah, blah. Each step of that is steps in a task analysis.
And the best way to come up with these steps is to either do it yourself or watch the student do it and see what's natural for them.
Exactly. I typically do that as I take, our staff and we say, okay, let's go through it ourselves. And what do we need to put in here? And what do we not need to put in here? And these task analysis are, can be pretty complicated. They could be 32 steps, but, unless you've got a really, really beginner learner, you want to try and keep your task analysis shorter. So for hand washing, I'm not going to break it down to turns on tap and then puts hands underneath water, leaves hands in water for 3 seconds, then turns on tap, put hands underwater, pump soap, the next one. Like, you're going to try and keep it as succinct as possible.
Right. And then the best way to teach it is using chaining. And chaining could be forwards chaining and it could be backwards chaining. So with something like hand washing, we might try a backwards chaining procedure. We find that backwards chaining is great for a lot of skill acquisition stuff. So if you're looking at teaching them the entire task, you might start by helping them through it, except for that last one. So you have them do the entire task, all the steps, but then you let them do the last one independently. And once they could do the last step independently, then you have them do the last 2 steps independently, etc. And then you're building up their independence from the last step all the way up to the first step, and then hopefully they can be independent with the entire sequence.
So in a true backward chain, what you would really do is just take that paper towel and have the student throw out the paper towel 10 times in a row. Once the child can do that, then you would, go with the last 2 steps. Okay, I'm going to dry my hands, throw out the paper towel, dry my hands, throw out the paper towel, and go backwards that way. Like Shira said, though, we typically would go through the entire task and prompt that. So in ABA technical terms, we would do a total task presentation combined with a backward chain. And that total task presentation is actually really great because what we've found is that as we're going through the entire list or the entire steps of that sequence with a student, even though it's prompted, they learn along the way. Especially our kiddos who are really smart and have to do hand washing over and over again. They're like, oh, so by the time you get to the 4th last step, they're like, I know how to turn off the taps because I've been doing this with you for ages now. And I find that you get some of that spontaneous learning.
Yeah, and then the other strategy would be something called forwards chaining. This is great for if you're trying to desensitize a student to something like getting a haircut, for example. So instead of putting them through the entire haircut process where they may be screaming and protesting the entire time, you're trying to get them used to it. So you wouldn't start with the entire sequence. You may start with just having the utensils out on the table. And if they can tolerate that, then you'd have them on the table and maybe like spray their hair with water. And then as you can build steps into that, you just keep adding so that you're forwards chaining. You're starting with the first one and adding from there. And as they're successful, you can continue to add until you get to the entire sequence.
And those strategies are really great ways to teach life skills.